So this is just a reminder that the Father and I are one, but the Father is greater than I. So what this means to me is that we are one with that infinite intelligence, but at the same time, it contains far greater treasures than we can perceive at any given time with our human senses, because it is infinite. And so by its very definition, we cannot, again, with our human senses, we can never fully grasp infinity. And we can start to embrace that as a good thing, because that means that there are infinite opportunities to allow that infinite intelligence to surprise and delight us. And it also this is just a reminder as well, going along with that, that what we can conceive of with our human imagination, that often what actually unfolds is far greater than we could even comprehend. And so I want to give you a story that will hopefully encourage you. And so about a year or so ago, probably a little bit over a year ago at this point, I was applying for, or not really applying, probably isn't the best word, but rather I was looking for copywriting positions, and specifically doing cold prospecting, reaching out to potential clients for a copywriting job. And I was feeling pretty desperate at the time. I was getting very little work, and I was very motivated to land a client. And even though I had some people reply back, a few people replied back, not very many, a very small percentage. Most people didn't reply at all, but there was a small percentage that replied back to indicate interest, but nothing ever really came of this. And so a year or so passed by, and oh yes, so I want to also kind of weave in that I had, again, from my limited logical human mind, I had this belief that X must happen first in order to reach Y. This very kind of conditional thinking. And I think we all do this, or I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think a lot of us do this in certain ways. So for instance, we believe that one thing must happen before another thing can unfold for us. And so, for instance, we might believe that we need to be fully, quote unquote, healed, whatever that means, right? Or we need to have our ideal body, or we need to achieve our weight loss goal, or whatever it is, before we can have the relationship that we desire. And in my case, it had to do with my income. And I had a few ideas for ways that I could increase my income, and it all involved these really big projects. And so I was under the belief that I had to finish these projects in order to reach this next level of income. And that it would not increase until I completed these very big projects. And then in the meantime, again, this is tying back to the copywriting clients. And so somebody that I had reached out to over a year ago actually replied back to me. I got an email from this individual, and essentially they said, like, they were so sorry for the late response, but now they were actually in the position to hire more freelance copywriters. And so I replied back and I said that I was interested, and like 2 or 3 more weeks went by. And so then I got another email from this company saying that they did have a project for me, but it was very last minute. And so I needed to call the individual from the company to discuss this project. And so we agreed upon a time, but when I tried to call her, for some reason the call was not going through. And I have to be real with you, all these very fearful thoughts were going through my mind and kind of projecting out into the future, all these worst case scenarios, and all these thoughts like, oh no, I had this great opportunity and now I've ruined it, and all this stuff. And it all worked out in the end. I ended up emailing her, and we found a way to communicate online instead. And then she actually told me once we were speaking that she had recently done some updates to her phone, and so she believed that might have been the issue. And so I think that's just kind of a great example of how there's so much more to all of this, and I can't pretend um, I can't pretend that I understand all of it by any means, but I think there's so much going on here. Then again, the neurological minds can comprehend, and people try to simplify it, which I understand. But sometimes I think that's again just the human tendency to want and try and simplify something that's very complex and to reduce it to a simple formula. But all these people that say, oh, your thoughts create and all of that, yeah, I think there is kind of a certain level of truth to that, but I think there's so much more going on than that as well. And really, if again, this is just like a theory, I can't really prove it, but I think part of it is there are tokens and where you direct your focus and attention the majority of the time, that will kind of earn you certain tokens, right? And so if it's generally directed in looking through the lens of love as opposed to lack, which I said before, then love is going to be your experience. And I think there's a lot of grace with this. And I think this is also important to remember. Yeah, so one or two, negative thoughts or fearful thoughts, like it's not going to necessarily ruin whatever you have going on, your goals and plans. And I think this is important to remember, kind of coming at it from the other end as well, because yeah, you might do, some positive affirmations, or go on a mental diet, or just try to think more positively in general, and then be discouraged when you're not immediately seeing your desired results. And so yeah, I think it's important to remember, to keep that in mind, with all of this stuff, right? That there's a lot more going on here than we're capable of explaining at a surface level. So anyway, the conversation ended up going very well, and she described the project to me, and it was like right up my alley. It was very creative, it was very stimulating, and it was honestly the kind of work that I was craving in my current experience, because my current role with the other company that I've been working for the past few years, which I'm very grateful, because since I believe March of last year, it has basically allowed me to have like a retainer income, and which has given me like a lot more stability, a much greater level of stability than I had over a year ago when I was desperately seeking all of this work. And so it's given me a lot of stability, and I've also learned like a lot of new skills in the process. But I really kind of missed the more creative work that I was doing in the past, which also involved, it was like more social, where it actually kind of involved like talking to people and engaging with people and doing kind of more journalistic type works, where you would be doing like interviews and then articles based on the interviews. So I was just very excited. It just really represented a positive new direction for me. And so then she told me that they basically kind of already had like a price that their company worked with, that they paid their writers, and which was kind of a relief because I never like quoting prices on the spot. But I was already just excited to get this opportunity in the first place, which was completely unexpected. And so I was thinking in my head that it might not be as much as my current position, the current client I work with, it might not be as much as they pay, but like I was okay with that. Like I was just happy to have the opportunity. And just to give you a bit more context, so I don't want to give you like any exact numbers, because I don't want to create that bias. I understand it's all relative anyway. But when I first started out doing copywriting and specifically writing articles, like it was hard for me to get even $100 per article. And not just because I was afraid to ask for that much. In one case, I did ask for that much, and they were like, no, we're keeping you at 75. And so anyway, when I started working for the current client, the one that I've been working with for the past few years, when I quoted my fee for them, it took a great deal of courage for me to quote this number. And when they didn't even bat an eyelash, or didn't even bat an eye, they just said, okay, and let's get started. And no back and forth, no, what's the word, bargaining. And so I was like, wow, that really just kind of opened up like what was possible for me. And I think, and that's another important reminder too, is to do the thing even if you don't feel fully ready, to feel the fear and do it anyway. So anyway, all of that is to say that going into working with this new client, because what I was making with the other client, I already felt like it was a good number. And compared to what I was making in the past, like it, at least from my idea, it seemed like a really good rate. And so anyway, I was like, it's probably not going to be as much, but I'm just going to be happy for the opportunity. And so then when she did tell me how much they paid per project, like I couldn't believe it. Like my mind was blown. It was more than twice what my current company was paying me. And so I think, so all of this is just again kind of goes to show that we don't even know what is possible from our logical human minds. And so that's why more and more so each day I am just surrendering to the flow of God. And yes, I do have a few affirmations that I say and a few like commandments that I say. But I would say most of it is just very general. And one of my go-to affirmations, and I recognize again, like I said, there's a lot of complexity to this. I don't think the affirmations themselves really have like any magic power, but when things started to shift internally for me, and then I actually started to see actual results, was with one particular affirmation. I would just say, why is my life so perfect? And I feel like affirmations like that for me, where it's very like open-ended. Also, obviously there's, isn't it wonderful? And so all of that, I feel like just kind of gets me into that state where like I'm in the flow of God. I'm just in that state of surrender, and I'm not trying to micromanage like every little detail. Because micromanaging and trying to control, and this is from somebody who was already a kind of a control freak before I even learned about manifestation and spirituality. And then when I first learned about these concepts, I feel like it actually triggered this mechanism within me to want to control things even more so. And it led to a lot of discouragement and frustration, to the point where I actually wished that I had never learned about any of this stuff, because I was just in a really not a good place, like mentally and emotionally. And when I finally let go and I finally just stepped into that state of surrender, that's when my life really began to kind of unfold in that magical, miraculous way that you hear people talking about, and you hear people talking about like in these success stories. And finally, I want to bring in this idea from A Course in Miracles, that the way it's presented in Course in Miracles, they call it the Holy Spirit. You can also call it I Am, God, Source, whatever resonates most with you. But the way they position it is that the Holy God or the Holy Spirit is basically your intermediary. And so it's allowing that spirit to do for you what you feel like you cannot do on your own. Again, coming from your human self and coming from all your perceived limitations, your doubts, your fears. And I want to, again, I've talked about this before, but to remind you of a meditation I've used from A Course in Miracles that's very powerful, where anytime you feel like any sort of dense, heavy thoughts and emotions, and they just call it grievances, which I like. They just keep it very simple. And so whenever you're experiencing these grievances, you basically just picture the grievances as dark clouds, and you can simply push the clouds aside so you can see the light, so you can see the clarity. But they don't stop there. The Holy Spirit, who is, it's so A Course in Miracles is kind of like a channeled text. And so the person, the author who's the Holy Spirit is speaking through, says if you feel like you can't push the clouds back on your own, then just imagine my hand reaching out to you and pulling you through the clouds. And so that to me is this whole idea of, again, going back to my Father and I are one. And so recognizing that God really is always here for you. But at the same time, it's not like something outside of you, because I used to do these like imaginal acts or affirmations, and I would expect like a booming voice, or I would expect some sort of like euphoric vision, or angels singing in the clouds. And then when that wouldn't happen, I would say, okay, well, where is it? All of this stuff must just be fake. And then on top of that, I would feel like a fool for even believing it in the first place. But the Holy Spirit, God, it is you. That's what I realized. It's not going to come from something outside of you. And usually any sort of shifts that you see, it's going to be very subtle at first, because it's coming from your vantage point. It's coming from your universe. And so usually kind of shifts within your universe tend to be very, very gradual, because again, it's coming from everything that you've accumulated over your lifetime, all the belief systems and values which have constructed your universe down to the very way that you see yourself and quote unquote others, like in the world. And so I guess this is just a message for you of hope, not to be discouraged if it feels like the changes aren't happening as fast as you would like them to be, or you feel like what you're experiencing isn't like what people are reporting in these success stories, because we're all unique individuals. And we all have our own ways of experiencing these miracles, and really just to appreciate the nuances. And I find that the more I appreciate the nuances, the more I really start to see the magic and the miracles and these everyday experiences. And the more I experience God surprising and delighting me in ways I never even could have imagined on my own. So thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.